success stories like that. Hello everyone, like he said, I'm Aimee La Fountain. First of all, thank you so much again, Peter, for having me, and thank you all for having me. I'm originally from Nutley, and so I've been hearing about the Rotary for years and your work, and particularly in Nutley, they're great with scholarships and education, so I've been very aware of the Rotary services for years, so it's great to be here. A bit to give you about my background. I grew up in Nutley, and I've been studying journalism basically since I was in high school. I took journalism classes for a couple years and then eventually became the editorials editor of my school paper, which was basically my first love, was editorials in writing. I love the idea of thinking things through and putting together an efficient, well-researched, well-stated argument, so it was great for me. That was my first taste of enjoying writing, influence, the potential of that, and so I had the thrill of both writing pieces on behalf of the staff and also editing pieces that were submitted to the editor, which was always nice to kind of get the pulse of students there. So I also, during that time was exciting, we wrote about the elections, we went to the National Scholastic Press Association conference in Atlanta, so that pretty much got me hooked. In college, I went to Marymount Manhattan in New York City, and I studied communication arts with a minor in writing. They didn't offer journalism, so I thought, okay, communications is a good study of media as a whole, how everything goes together, and that set me on a good course for what I would do years later and what I'm doing now. So during college, I focused on journalism, focused on media studies, and for my senior thesis, I actually wrote Tense Times, which was in 2008 when there was a lot of changes going on in the journalism industry. So my paper and my work that year focused on print editions sort of phasing back a little, the rise of digital coming up, newspapers kind of adapting to all of those changes. I have a lot of theories on that, but that's a whole other presentation. This was around the time the Rocky Mountain News had closed, and you saw more hyper-local websites coming up. The Huffington Post and Gawker and blogs were all coming up, so there was a lot of changes going on, which was really interesting for me to study this as I'm about to enter that field. Two highlights for me that also kind of further enriched my interest in media was I had a comment in the New York Times printed in 2008 about the evolution of media and the newspaper industry, and then timing worked out well. My instinct as a writer is if there's something that's bothering me, I'm that writer who has to get it out. And the timing worked out very interestingly that there was a book that came out in 2009 about entitlement with young people in college and how they feel they just automatically should get good grades, and it just so happened that around this time I was contesting one of my grades and did not at all identify with the prototype student that this author described and had reasonings and points and all these things, so that inspired me to write a letter to the editor, and that was my first letter to the editor that got printed in the New York Times, so that was a nice thrill going as I set out for my career. And at this time, I also did 2 internships at MSNBC in fall 2008, spring 2009. In fall of 2008, I worked at MSNBC's Media Relations Office, which could not have been more exciting with the 2008 election going on and nonstop news coverage, and it was very exciting. And then in the spring of 2009, I worked as an intern for Countdown with Keith Olbermann, which was also incredibly exciting time to be there because in from 2008 to 2009 it was the top rated show on the network. So I couldn't imagine a better TV broadcasting gig than that. So after college, started applying, started looking at local newspapers, state newspapers, and in 2010 I started working as a correspondent for North Jersey Media Group, where I still am now. I have now write for a number of their publications, including BergenCounty.com, where I write a lot of how-to and partner stories. I write for 3 local papers, mainly the Town News, which covers Paramus, Oradell, and River Edge, and then I write for the Ridgewood News, and then I also contribute to the Town Journal, which is Hohokus, Pascack Valley area a little bit. But what I started out doing was a column called Tending to Business. That was my first kind of foray into working for North Jersey Media Group. And that was mainly business profiles. And the focus of that is, if the reader does not know your business or isn't familiar with this local business, let's give them a taste of background, fill them in, draw them in. And I learned a lot over my time doing that column, which I still manage now, but one thing that kept popping up to me was it's like the line, there's no small parts, there's just small actors. There's really no small story subjects, and there's no really small profiles. It's more a matter of what you get out of it and what you report on it. And one thing I noticed is it all depends on what kind of questions you ask. The quality of your questions will almost always impact the quality of the story that you write. And so that was a big lesson for me that, oh, this might be just a story on a local restaurant, but if you take the time to look up things, talk to the owner, find out their dream, why they wanted to open this restaurant, there's a whole story there. And it really taught me to not just look at the surface of things and to really dig deep, and that's how you find the best stories, that's how you make things that are worth reading. And I also was fortunate enough that way to learn how much visually something is good in the community, and how a company might seem very simple at first glance, but then you can find out unexpected things about how they serve the community if you look into it or if you ask questions. And a lot of my experiences come back to research. You could say, okay, this is going to be pretty straightforward. This is a story on Gold's Gym. I know how gyms work. I know how the trainers work. And then you find out, oh, they did this whole fundraiser every year for victims of Sandy to raise money. So your stories are inevitably good or bad depending on how much research you do, the questions you ask, how you approach the subjects you're interviewing. It comes down to a lot of factors, and I keep learning and relearning that. And the more interesting that I make the story, the more likely it is for somebody else to want to read it, and it keeps me motivated. So it's definitely a two-way street that I keep having in mind whenever I sit down to write a story. And also, ideally, the more somebody relates and admires the business owner, the more likely the reader is to want to patronize that business. So it kind of just goes around and benefits everybody when you put in the work, you put in the good research and writing and all of that. And also just from a personal standard, I wouldn't want to put my own byline on anything that I wouldn't want to stand behind. I take that very seriously. So the more time I spend with North Jersey Media Group, the more I kind of hone in on how to shape pieces, how to tell stories better. And another thing I learned that's exciting about my business column is that every story is different. It's a bit like being an actor where you get a crash course in all different fields with each business that you profile. So, and that's a great lesson for me in life too, about your perspective, where you can say, oh, it's the same column I'm writing every week. Well, yeah, but it's never the same business. It's different aspects of different fields, and it keeps things interesting. And it makes you more knowledgeable, whether you're learning about the history of martial arts and how it's not just fighting, it's based in respect and not going to the limits unless you have to, and all of these things that I wouldn't normally know about unless I took the time to engage business owners, ask questions, and then be able to share that to make for a more interesting story. And so one thing to kind of summarize that is that interest has to be there. Kevin Spacey made a great comment once about acting, that he's never good if he's not interested in the role and interested in the story behind the character. And I think that definitely applies to writing as well. If I'm not interested in the story, somebody's not going to be interested in reading it. And it's kind of the same way as when you're going to a job interview. If you don't sound excited about your career, why is the hiring manager going to be excited about you? So the more I progress in my field, the more I realize that how much I engage the material I'm working on, the more likely somebody reading it is going to be to respond to it as well. And so I've, over the years, pretty much profiled an array of different businesses, everything from restaurants to gyms to shoe stores to dentists and doctors and everything. Paramus, Oradell, and River Edge, and then also Ridgeway. So it's everything. It's very interesting, and again, it's you have to have interest, because you think, okay, straightforward, I'm going to call up a dentist today, and then he tells you, you know, I worked on Mickey Rooney once, and you go on. So you never know, and you've got to be open to possibility. You got to be open to finding a new angle, and that's where the fun comes in. And also another thing that I've noticed, which is really nice, is you never know the backstories of your neighbors. I've started working a couple years ago with the Ridgewood News, so I do a lot of features now. I do a lot of profiles, and it's really interesting to see the people behind the public things you see. Most recently, I did a follow-up story on a girl who lives in Ridgewood who's in The King and I on Broadway, and she's just turned 8, I believe, and she's the youngest person in the show and on The King and I in Lincoln Center. And you would just see this girl walking down the street, and you would not know, oh, this girl's on Broadway. And it's a great lesson in you never know the potential that's out there. I had another feature story a while back on a local florist in Ridgewood, and found out she helped arrange floral arrangements at Christmas time for the White House. And it's a great lesson of, you walk into this business, and obviously you always hope somebody has good experience, but you never know just how big of a scale that experience could be. You think, oh, I'm walking into the florist, and then you find out, oh, she's made it to the White House, and that's a really rare opportunity, and I want to talk to this person more. So it's all about how you approach things. And my favorite type of stories are especially nonprofits. I think it's very inspiring, and some of the most inspiring stories I've had are local people who've decided to start their own organizations. One that comes to mind is there was a Pascack Valley High alumni, Scott Carell, who has an organization called the Unlock Foundation. And he went to Africa multiple times in his teens and 20s, and now he has started a school out in Africa in Nambia. And it's really incredible to see the potential there and the stories that are around you, and it's always nice to see, the local person done good angle, and the potential of that, the importance of spreading that story, and the potential of people reading about it and doing something in response to that is what excites me as a writer. I remember finding out a few days later from Scott, he said, oh, I've been getting calls all morning about people wanting to support and be involved. And to me, that's just incredible, the direct link there between awareness from people and that turning into numbers of financial support or getting involved or contributing however they can. And another story that really I thought was incredible to cover was a boy in River Edge who's autistic and turned his birthday into a fundraiser for a foundation called North Star, which provides service dogs. And something that really was incredible to me looking back about that was just the reach of the story. Here's a kid in River Edge, and North Star is a foundation in Connecticut, and then the 2 boys who ended up receiving the service dogs were actually actually live in Kentucky. So it's a great way to see the mapping of how people influence each other and can help one another, and how that goes beyond your town, beyond your state, beyond your region. It was just a great story. And also it was nice, thanks to our article, the boy's mother knew that 2 boys were getting the dog but didn't know all of the details. So it was nice to give both families that opportunity to have a better understanding of something that's impacting directly their lives. I believe they're actually going to meet, which is great. And to see that all come together is just incredible. So while I was doing my column Tending to Business, I got an assignment to cover SCORE, which eventually led me to the work that I do now with SCORE, which is mainly, as Peter said, SCORE is either part-time or retired former business executives and professionals who volunteer their time to mentor people who are either aspiring to open a small business or have a small business they're looking to expand. And so what I do is mainly outreach in terms of we reach out to potential mentors who might want to join SCORE, which please feel free to ask me because we're always looking for more volunteers. And my other role in terms of outreach is to get new clients in and to help increase SCORE's exposure. So some of the main things I do for that, number 1 is social media. It's been very exciting because when I first started with SCORE, they didn't have a Facebook page. They had a limited Twitter account, didn't have a presence on LinkedIn. And again, it comes back to reach. It's really incredible to see. We'll have one day somebody from California who suddenly liked our page, and you think to yourself, how did somebody in California know about the Bergen County, New Jersey chapter of this organization? But the wonder of social media is it connects everything and tightens those connections. And the other thing that I kind of always tell our mentors is sometimes it's hard to gauge. I get the classic business question, so where are the results? Where is the data? And so mentors will ask me, how do we know that social media is working? How do we know that this is really worth our time? And the one argument that I would tell basically anybody in any business that I keep coming back to is it might be hard to see specifics in terms of social media and how much you're connecting to people, because somebody can read something you post but not necessarily actually physically respond, is I can guarantee you it's better to have that presence than to not have it. That's one thing to me that is crystal clear, and I think most people in my field would say that as well. So it's been really interesting to see our social media for SCORE evolve and get better, and to have that presence. Another thing we do is we try to partner with other organizations at business expos. We also reach out to local officials so that they have SCORE services in mind for referrals. If somebody happens to walk into their office and says, I'm looking to start a business, can you please tell me what resources are out there, similar to what Peter said. And then earned media is a big part of promotion that we do. I've been fortunate that the Ledger has covered SCORE a few times. The Record has covered us. We had a New York One segment, which I was very proud of. We've also been on the radio. Mary Lou Henner did a story on us on her radio show. And another thing that I always encourage people to do is testimonial style success stories, similar to Peter. It never gets old hearing people who benefited from SCORE services, and everybody responds to it. We had one client who started a nonprofit called Feeding by Reading, which is a fundraiser where kids read books as a readathon program, and the more books they read goes towards meals for kids in the community. So it's another win-win where the kids are encouraged to be proactive and read, and then they also help their peers to grow little philanthropists. And we have another client, Christine Deere, who started a yoga apparel line that's now been featured in Shape magazine, Fitness. Naomi Campbell, I believe Candace, Brooke Burke-Charvet is wearing our clothes. So the success story angle never gets old either. So that's another thing I always suggest to any nonprofit or anybody looking to promote their business. Show how this person succeeded. People always, it's a great lesson of my life, people always respond to a good story, and I always enjoy telling a good story. So that's kind of the big theme of my field.
I'm sorry. You can continue in a second, but if anybody has to leave, let's pull the 50-50 at this point.
Oh, yeah.
Sorry.
That is kind of the end of it, so to wrap up. Yeah.
Just a question. I would like to give you the permission to write about this club.
Okay.
The most interested club you could ever run.
Oh, yeah, I have to look into that because I'm sure we've...
As long as she does that, she does.
Okay. I feel like